Aircrafts are really amazing machines that get you from point A to point B really fast, one of the fastest mode of transportation available as of date. And these are very interesting machines, and I've already started a video series explaining the ins and outs and how do aircrafts operate already. So this is one of the videos in that series. Make sure to check the playlist out. But in today's video, I'm going to be explaining what are different flight control surfaces and what are their purpose and how we use them to turn left or right and climb up and down, etc, etc. So if you are ready for this video, fasten the seatbelts because we're ready for takeoff. What's up, fellow aviators, and welcome back to yet another episode of the ground school section on the FlyTuber, flying simplified through YouTube. My name is AILERON, and on this channel I talk about interesting aviation facts and aircraft knowledge and detailed explanations just like in this video. So if you are new here, consider subscribing. Flight control surfaces, as the name itself suggests, these are surfaces that we used in flight to control the flight path of an aircraft. There are different types of flight control surfaces. The two main categories is the primary flight controls and the secondary flight controls. The primary flight controls are three things. The first is the ailerons, which are located at each wingtips, almost the wingtips, and then the second one is the elevators, which are attached to the horizontal stabilizers behind the aircraft, and then the rudder, which is attached to the vertical stabilizer behind the aircraft, right? These are flight control surfaces. These are surfaces that are attached and hinged. What a hinge is basically, it's just like a door, right? A door is hinged to a wall so that it can deflect. Similarly, these surfaces are hinged to these surfaces, ailerons to the wings and elevators to the horizontal stabilizer and rudder to the vertical stabilizer. They are hinged so that they can deflect in different directions. And let's look at how do these surfaces deflect and how can we achieve different things using these control surfaces. So before we continue on, there are some important terms that you need to be familiar with. First is obviously the three axes of an aircraft. If you are a science student, you know that in a three-dimensional space there are three axes: the X, Y, and Z axis for depth, right? Similarly, an aircraft also has three axes. The first is the longitudinal axis, longitudinal axis, and this axis runs the entire length of the aircraft from the nose to the tip. This is known as the longitudinal. So imagine that there is a stick that goes through this aircraft. That stick is known as the longitudinal axis. Similarly, imagine that there is another stick which goes laterally from wingtip to wingtip, right? Like this, a straight stick, right? This axis is known as the lateral axis of the aircraft. And then finally, the third is the vertical axis. Obviously, the vertical. Imagine a stick that runs from top to bottom straight through the cabin. That stick or that axis is known as the vertical axis of the aircraft. Let's imagine that these three sketch pens represent the three different sticks or the three different axes of an aircraft. The vertical axis of an aircraft, the longitudinal axis of an aircraft in that direction, and then finally the lateral axis of an aircraft. So these three, so all of these three axes are perpendicular to each other, right? Mutually perpendicular to each other in the three-dimensional space, and all of these three meet at a single point here, which is the CG or the center of gravity of an aircraft. CG is a very well-known concept which is taught in class 12 physics, and CG is generally located somewhere in the middle of the aircraft. These three primary flight controls that I talked about, the ailerons, the elevators, and the rudders, their responsibility is, each of its responsibility is to turn and pitch the aircraft about a particular axis. So very easy. Let's quickly look at the examples. The first one is the elevators, for example. These elevators, right, they deflect up and down, and what they do is basically they move the aircraft or they deflect the aircraft about its lateral axis. So the lateral axis, if you remember, ran from wingtip to wingtip in that direction. If you were to twist this particular stick or this particular axis, that is the responsibility of the aircraft elevators. If they go up, the aircraft tail section goes down and the nose section goes up, and that's how aircraft climbs. and if these surfaces go down, then the aircraft tail section goes up, the nose goes down, and aircraft descends. The next one is the ailerons. Ailerons are flight control surfaces attached at the wing tips, at each wing tips, and they have the responsibility of turning the aircraft about its longitudinal axis, right? If you remember, that was the longitudinal axis running from nose to the tail. Okay, if you were to twist the aircraft along the longitudinal axis, that is the responsibility of the ailerons, and how they do that is very similar to the elevators, but what happens is they do it in the opposite direction. That is, if the right aileron goes up, the left aileron goes down. So what happens is, if this aileron is going up, very similar to the elevators, right? If this is going up, the whole push on this wing will be downwards, right? Since the elevator is going up to the airflow, remember all the concept, and the wing goes down. And on the contrary, this aileron has moved below, right? It has moved, deflected downwards, and because of which the whole push on this side will be up. This wing will be pushed upwards, this wing will be pushed downwards, and that is how aircraft can be rolled or banked to the right. And exactly opposite for the left turn, this particular aileron goes up, pushing the wing down, this aileron goes down, pushing the wing up, and that's how aircraft turns left. So that is the role of the ailerons. If you sit in a flight somewhere close to the wing or the rear part, and you can clearly look at these ailerons deflecting about turn, will be likewise like I explained. And the third and final one is the rudder, which is situated at the horizontal stabilizer. It is hinged to it. It's located at the end or the tail section of the aircraft, and this particular rudder is responsible for moving the aircraft about its perpendicular axis, the vertical axis. Okay, so if you twist this particular stick like that, okay, that is the responsibility of the rudder. And why is that used is basically first of all for a coordinated turn, so that if you can think of a coordinated turn as if you are sitting in a car and speeding really really fast on a highway, and there is a really tight turn, and there is spectacles or anything put up on the dashboard of the car, and if you take a really tight turn on a high speed, that particular thing or that article will be pushed outwards towards the turn. And this is one thing that you don't want in an aircraft, because all of the cargo assembly will be shifted. There are chances, if the turn is too tight, then there are chances of passengers banging their head against the windows, for example. So the rudders coordinate the turn, and that forward push is compensated. Another very important implication of rudder is during landings, when an aircraft is coming in to land and there is a wind from a particular direction, say for example from the left. If there wasn't any rudder, then aircraft would simply lose the runway center line, and instead of landing on the runway center, it would land off the runway. What aircrafts do is they use this rudder, they deflect to a side. So for example, if the wind is coming from the left, the rudders will also deflect towards the left. Okay, and obviously rudder is also like an aerofoil, like a elevator or an aileron. If it deflects to the left, wind comes, hits the rudder, deflects in that direction, but the resultant force will push the tail to the right, and in turn this nose will be pushed to the left. Okay, wind is coming from the left, rudder is deflected towards the left, the force is in this direction, the nose goes into the wind. From the direction that wind is coming, the nose is pushed in that direction. Now what happens in this way is the aircraft center line is maintained. How? Because the wind is trying to push the aircraft away from the center line to the right, but since the aircraft direction, the nose is pointing into the wind, the aircraft is wanting to go inside the wind, right? And the result is that both these forces are cancelled out, and as a result the aircraft center line will be dragged. Obviously there is some other maneuvers that we need to carry out, because we cannot land and touch down in this state. We have to bring the nose back to the center line, but that is some detailed information for the flying part. Now those were the primary flight controls and their responsibilities. The others are secondary flight controls. I'm not going to go deep into it. Again, broadly speaking, there are three secondary flight controls. The first is the flaps. So flaps are basically high lift devices. These are extendable surfaces that extend outwards and downwards. You can see these if you sit on a window side upon landing, and once these are extended out, the aircraft can basically still be flying at a fairly slower speed. That wouldn't have been possible if the aircraft didn't have flaps. And obviously that is the trailing edge flaps, or the flaps that are attached to the trailing edge of the wing, and obviously we also have a leading edge flaps, or the flaps that are attached to the the leading edge, the front portion of the wing. These are known as slats, and they also have pretty similar function. How? Obviously that's a very detailed video. And the second of the secondary flight controls is the spoilers or speed brakes. Both of these are one and the same. Basically, if you look upon landing, as soon as the aircraft touches down, certain surfaces extend upwards from the wing on either wings, right? For an example, an A320 has 5 of these surfaces that extend once the aircraft touches down on the runway upon landing. What they do is, obviously, first of all, if they extend after landing on ground, they are known as spoilers, because they spoil forward thrust inertia that an aircraft is in. And then the same surfaces, once they are used in air to slow down the aircraft, they are known as speed brakes. The name itself is self-explanatory. So that is the main usage of spoilers or the speed brakes. These surfaces are attached to the top portion of either wings. And finally, the third of the secondary flight control is the aircraft trim systems. Now, aircraft trim system itself is an in-depth concept that requires its own video, but for the sake of this video, understand that these deflections on the control surfaces require inputs from the pilots. So if he's a Boeing pilot, then he has that yoke, and an Airbus pilot has that side stick that they pull or push for the deflections. So for example, if a pilot has just taken off a runway, for takeoff he will be pulling back on his control or his stick so that the control surfaces deflect. Now after takeoff, the deflection has happened, the aircraft has taken off. After takeoff, this aircraft has to, say for example, reach 40,000 feet, and it takes time, 15 minutes to 20 minutes, depending upon different aircrafts, to reach that height. And for all of those 15 or 20 minutes, it's really impractical for a pilot to just keep sitting, pushing back on the stick or on the yoke or on the stick, right? So just for that purpose, there are something known as aircraft trim surfaces, which are attached as a secondary surface to these primary elevators. That is why they are also called as the secondary flight control surfaces, right? So what they do is they deflect in such a way that the pilot, once he has done his input and trimmed the aircraft appropriately, he need not keep that pressure on the stick or on the yoke, and the aircraft will maintain that particular attitude. So those were the primary flight controls and the secondary flight controls of an aircraft, and what are their implications and uses, and how do we use these to control and maneuver an aircraft in the air. I hope that this video was really helpful and informative for you guys. If you think so, then please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with as many friends as possible. I'll be coming up with interesting videos, and most importantly, I think very basics of flying and how aircraft takes off and lifts, etc. is done, which is why I'm thinking of the next episode to be from the other series which I promised, that is the flight school. And in that we'll be looking at what we do actually in the cockpit. Forget about this theory and these papers and all the diagrams. What we actually do once we are in there in a cockpit of an aircraft. So see you over in that video. Until then, take care, bye bye, and happy landings.